Hi everyone, I'm Angie Spong and I'm putting together a series of projects for machine embroidery. To purchase the project, please go to my website at www.angies.co.nz, and you can also follow me on Facebook at Angie's Machine Embroidery. Hope you enjoyed this presentation.
The seams we're sewing here are fairly bulky because there's 2 layers of batting in there. So with this machine, it's best to lower the foot pressure. Go into your machine settings and take your foot pressure down. I put mine down to about 3 and I found that worked well. Tick this to OK and then we're ready to sew. When you have sewn the seams, then I'm going to just trim the batting back to the seam allowance. Just got a little pair of sharp curved scissors here. I find those work well. This does take a little bit of time, but it's so worthwhile because now we've got the bulk of the batting out of the seam and it sits so much better. So now I've joined all my top sections to my lower sections and trimmed the batting out from the seam allowance. I've pressed the seam allowance down towards the embroidery and up on the embroidered fabrics. So now I've pinned the pieces all together, so it's all looking rather smart. You alternate an embroidered section with a Christmas tree section, and of course you've got the 2 opening Christmas tree pieces at the back here. So we've got all our segments joined together now, so it's looking really nice. To do that, we sew all the seams with a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance there. Trim your batting away from either side. Now I've pressed the seam allowances away from the embroidery sections. Next we need to join the sections up for the frill around the bottom. So there's lots of little seams there to join all the sections together. Use a straight stitch and a zigzag, or if you've got a faff machine, you may like to go onto my website and there's a little overlock stitch there which is really handy for small projects, and that's available in the various faff formats for your 9mm stitches. I've pressed all those little seams I joined the strips together with to form the frill, and now I've hemmed one edge. I've used the rolled edge there on my overlocker or serger using the embroidery thread from the embroidery design. Now we need to gather or ruffle the other edge. I'm using a ruffler foot. I'm putting that on the 6 stitch setting there, and I've put the depth of the ruffle about halfway there on that adjusting screw there, and I'll use a normal stitch length. Read the instruction leaflet that comes with your ruffler foot, and then always do a little test run on a similar piece of fabric first. Then it's just so quick and easy to just feed the fabric through the guide in the foot, just holding the fabric quite loosely in front of you because it's quite vicious the way it throws the pleats in. It won't take me long to get around the rest of these. It's easier to cut your backing fabric before you attach the frill. So place your skirt onto the wrong side of your backing fabric with that back opening parallel to your selvage. Then you can cut all the way around the outside edge, up that back split and around the inner circle. Use a fabric marking pen to rule that line up the centre there for the back opening and that inner circle. Then you can cut that up and take the inner circle out. That is now our backing fabric all ready to go. Put your backing fabric aside and then we're ready to apply the frill to the bottom edge of your skirt. On the right hand end of your frill, you'll need to do a little double turn back and stitch that to form a hem. Then that gets placed onto the left hand back opening at the fold line, which is where the batting comes to. Pin that all in place and then baste that around, stopping just before the other back opening here. Then we'll calculate how much we need here, do another little hem at the end, and then finish stitching that in place. That's got the other end of the frill finished off there, and I finished just basting that in place. Now we're going to put the right sides together of the backing and the skirt, and just do a 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance down either side of the back opening. The two back seams are now stitched, and the seam allowance gets pressed towards the opening so that this seam will now fold over there. So the seam is actually turned back to the back side there. So that opening is going to continue through there and into the frill. So that's nice and neat. Now we need to actually stitch the backing in place. So fold it on the fold line, so the seam is actually back this way here, and then we can stitch this around the bottom edge all the way around and finishing up over here with that seam in the same position. I've now pinned the backing to the skirt all the way around the outside edge, so it's ready to stitch on that 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. You can see that the edge here has been folded on that fold line with the seam just to the inside here. Also, just do check around and make sure that all of your seam allowances are facing towards the Christmas fabric. You can see here I've actually unpicked this one and just turned that in the right direction. This will make it easier when we come to stitch these seams later. So now I can go ahead and just sew that all the way around. I've now got the backing all stitched onto the skirt here. All I've got to do now is to just go through and trim that excess batting away up to the stitching line, and then the fun part is turning it through. So I've turned my Christmas tree skirt through this hole in the centre so that the lining is all looking nice on the back. We do need to press this seam, so just pull the frill down and just press that around all the way, and the same underneath as well, so that it sits nicely. Now, next job is to stitch in the ditch through the seam line on all of the plain coloured fabrics where you've got your embroidery. So thread your machine up with a thread to match your plain coloured thread on the top, and with a bobbin to match your lining. Put your stitch in the ditch foot on, and just sew in that seam line there up to here on all of those plain sections. So we've got 5 of those to do. I've now completed all my stitching in the ditch here. I've stay stitched that in a circle and done a large zigzag to hold all those edges together nicely while I do the bias binding around there. And then we've just got the 3 ties to put down the back. Your ties, we cut 3 strips like this, and I've used a size 18 bias maker to press the sides into the middle there, and then I've pressed them again to form a fold down the center. So now I'm ready to cut that one in half and to make those up. The bias strip that we cut for the inner circle, I've also put through the bias maker, and I'm ready to stitch that on now as well. The inner circle of your Christmas tree skirt is fairly small, so you might just like to try that on your tree to see if it's going to fit. If you do need to cut the hole larger, then you'll need to cut your bias strip longer. What I've done here is to pin this onto the wrong side of my skirt, unfold the bias strip, and I've pinned that in the fold line with my raw edges even, just leaving a little bit extending over the edge here. So now I'm ready to stitch around here on my machine. You need to have about 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch of bias past the end of the circle there. Just turn that end in and then fold the bias down to the right side and pin that in place. Now all I've got to do is to set my machine up with the narrow edge foot, which has a guide in the center, move my needle position across slightly, and then I can edge stitch this in place from the right side. And that will then finish off my inner circle. I've put all 3 strips through the bias maker and then folded them in half again and pressed them. Cut those in half in length so that we've now got 6 strips. Now we just need to fold the ends in. So on either end of your strip you need to turn in 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters, then turn the folds back in again, and then fold the strip in half, and we'll pin that end in place. Now I need to do that to the other end as well. Then at the machine I'm just going to change my thread so that it matches this fabric. Stitch across here, down across the other end and back down the other side. So we're going to edge stitch all the way around. The position of the ties down the back opening are indicated on the pattern. They need to be stitched just a little bit back from the folded edge, 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. This then gives the bow room to tie up and the folds just to meet together. Well, that was fun on my machine. I stitched on the ties using a 4-way directional stitching program, which is for patches, which meant that I didn't have to turn the skirt round through the machine each time. So all we've got to do now is to place the skirt under your tree and tie the bows. And I like to tie the bows so that the tails all come to the bottom like that. There we go.